Hey, it's Tali, here to tell you about the podcast Israel Story. Now, more than ever, Israel is a tough topic. Some love it, others hate it, but Israel Story offers a nuanced, faithful window into the extraordinary stories of everyday people in Israel. Beautiful and ugly, tragic and inspiring, ridiculous and heartwarming. Check out hundreds of timeless episodes in their back catalog or dive into the 65 Wartime Diaries episodes capturing slivers of life right now. Hear voices from soldiers to survivors, farmers to rabbis, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, and connect with this complicated, amazing place. Hosted by Mishi Harman and produced with the Jerusalem Foundation and the Times of Israel, find Israel Story wherever you get your podcasts.
In need of a good read or just want to keep up with the books everyone's talking about? NPR's Book of the Day podcast gives you today's very best writing in a pocket-sized show. Whether you're looking to engage with the big questions of our times or temporarily escape from them, we've got an author who'll speak to you. Catch today's great books in 15 minutes or less on the Book of the Day podcast, only from NPR.
Welcome to the 5 Books, where each week we talk with a Jewish author about 5 books that are near and dear to them. My name is Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen. Every week I ask Jewish authors about 5 books in 5 categories. We'll hear about 2 Jewish books that have impacted the author's Jewish identity. We'll hear about 1 book not necessarily Jewish that they think everyone should read, a book that changed their worldview. We'll get a peek into what book the author is reading now, and we'll get to hear about the new book they've just published and how it came about. Today we'll be talking with Bonny Reichert about her memoir, How to Share an Egg, a true story of hunger, love, and plenty. Bonny grew up hearing stories about her father's near starvation and ultimate survival in Auschwitz-Birkenau. She never imagined she would be able to face this epic legacy head-on until a chance encounter with a perfect bowl of borscht in Warsaw set Bonny on a journey to unearth her culinary lineage. She began to dig for the roots of her food obsession, dish by dish. Stepping into the kitchen to connect her past with her future, the author recounts the defining moments of her life in a poignant tale of scarcity and plenty. Bonny Reichert is a National Magazine award-winning journalist. When she turned 40, she had a now or never feeling in her bones and quit her job to enroll in culinary school. After that, she began to explore her relationship with food on the page, seeing her childhood in the restaurant business and her background as the daughter of a Holocaust survivor in a new light. Bonny was born in Edmonton, Alberta, and lives in Toronto with her husband and little dog, Bruno. Her 3 almost adult children come and go. She holds a Master's of Fine Art in Creative Nonfiction and teaches writing at the University of Toronto's School of Continuing Studies. How to Share an Egg is her first book. In our conversation, Bonny will expand our view of what children of survivors have experienced.
You know, I think we all have certain images in our mind of what a Holocaust survivor family is like. And, you know, some of those things might be true, but there's so much more. There is so much joy and beauty and pleasure, and I was brought up with so much of that.
And we'll hear about how reading Philip Roth's Portnoy's Complaint helped Bonny write her own Jewish story.
Portnoy's Complaint just made me feel that there's a lot of space for me to find my place in the continuum of Jewish voices and to not be afraid to expose myself and to be myself on the page.
And Bonny will share why she thinks everyone should read Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking.
I think something about it that just speaks to me so much is that she's writing her way through what she's experiencing. She's actually using the writing to figure out what the hell is going on. It's so, it's a book about death, but it's so alive.
That's all coming up next. Welcome to the 5 Books. Bonny, thank you so much for joining me today. I really loved reading your book. I thought it was such a poignant meditation on food and caretaking and written with such vulnerability and tenderness. I would warn anyone reading the book to definitely not read it while you're hungry. because the way you write about food is so mesmerizing. And of course, it becomes clear that food plays all of the roles in your life: comfort and connection, identity, and of course, necessity, as you write about your father's Holocaust experience and your own sort of struggles to grow up in the shadow of that. So thank you so much for joining me and being with me today.
Thank you so much to you. I'm so happy to be here.
So maybe if you could just tell everyone in your words how you would describe the book.
Yeah. How to Share an Egg is a memoir wrapped around a family story. So it's really the story of my experience as a child growing up in the shadow of something bigger, something dark, and something scary. And yet, you know, the story of a beautiful childhood with an incredible father, and the journey is through food.
The journey is definitely through food. Each chapter focuses on a different food, and you sort of tell the story in that way. You talk about in the book feeling that push-pull toward telling this story. What are the pieces that you think now, reflecting back, had to sort of come together for you to be able to sit down and write it in this way?
So honestly, it took about 40 years for me to be able to tell the story. The title of the book, How to Share an Egg, came to me when I was about 12, 13 years old. And my father had this story right after liberation. He had been, you know, after being in Birkenau, he had been on death marches and then hidden in a barn with his cousin, and they were liberated by the Americans and starving, and they went door to door begging for food, and they were given one egg. And, you know, how do you share one egg between two starving teenage boys? So I knew that story, and it was with me from a very young age, and this was the name of the book. But I couldn't write that book. It was going to be a book of my dad's story, so not a memoir at all, but a book of his survival story. And he wanted it. He wanted me to write this. And it was, you know, it wasn't a terrible pressure or burden, not an overt one. He's a wonderful human being. He's 94 years old and a wonderful father. And we were very close. And I was a writer from a young age. And so it was more like a collaboration between us, but I didn't realize just how intense my own pressure on myself was to write this book. And of course, I was paralyzed. I was paralyzed by that pressure. How do you write a book about something so huge? How do you do it justice? And then the other part of it was my intense fear of the Holocaust. You know, growing up, I was almost phobic. So I was really caught in this terrible position where I had something to express, and I also wanted to please my father, but I couldn't find my way to it.
Book 1, A Jewish Book from Childhood, Forever, by Judy Blume.
So I grew up in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. It was a sort of a newer Jewish community and small. We weren't religious per se. We didn't keep kosher. We weren't Shomer Shabbos. We belonged to a conservative synagogue. But the feeling in our house was very Jewish. You know, my father was a Hasid back in Poland, and that sort of Yiddish soul, I guess, never really left him. And even though his family was only intact for about 9 years before the war, somehow, I always want to cry when I say this, but somehow it gave him such a base and such a strong sense of self that he brought it with him. In the book, I say he brought it with him like a message in a bottle, that old country Yiddishkeit. My mom's family came from Russia and Ukraine. So she was a first generation Canadian. My parents would speak Yiddish to each other a little bit when they didn't want us to understand. I went to Hebrew day school until 6th grade, and then I went to public school.
And you write in your book about that first year of middle school and public school where you faced anti-Semitism for the first time. I wonder if you could tell us a little more of what that was like.
Yes. What's so interesting about that is until I sat down to write the book, I hadn't really told anybody about that. And I learned something about the shame of being a victim. Even my sisters, who I'm close to, I hadn't told them. So I moved from this cozy little Hebrew day school to a junior high, just an ordinary junior high. And I really had no idea what I was in for. So I was, maybe a little bit of a geek. I wore skirts to school. I don't know. It's just, I was, very naive for sure and not necessarily cool. And I think I probably stuck out a little bit. And it's almost like the anti-Semitism was incidental. I was called Jew this and Jew that. I was threatened once. I can't say that I was threatened because I was Jewish. It was sort of the whole package. But anybody who was different had a rough time. And that's the only time in my life that I was bullied. It never happened to me again, or at least not overtly. But it was pretty scarring. Oh my gosh. It was just, I couldn't believe it. And, I didn't go to my parents for help. Growing up as the child of a Holocaust survivor, I felt that would hurt my father so much more than it hurt me. So I absolutely was protecting him. And I honestly don't even know if he knows now. When he hears this podcast, might be the first time.
Wow. He comes across as such a special, special man. It's hard not to fall in love with him also. In terms of Judy Blume, it's interesting because she does write so much focused on adolescence and feeling left out and all of the kind of social machinations of adolescence. So I'm curious to hear why you chose this book.
This was such a fun assignment. I loved it. It was just great. So I just wanted to say that it was such a pleasure to, go through my bookshelves and go through the bookshelves of my memory and pick out these books that resonated with me. I loved it. So thank you for asking me to do it.
That's great.
So Judy Blume in general was so important to me and really, I'm going to guess, to all the girls my age, not only Jewish girls. She did write about adolescence in such a fresh way, such an honest way, such a almost peer-to-peer kind of way. It wasn't patronizing. It wasn't lecturing. There was no agenda that she was trying to manipulate you or teach you, or it was just so direct. And, the problems that you have as an adolescent girl were very much addressed there. So, periods. And then I had chosen actually Forever as my book because I remember very clearly being about 12 years old and being at summer camp, and someone had Forever, and we were reading all the sexual parts, which is most of the book is about sex, and, by flashlight late at night. And it was information that we needed. And again, it was information that was without judgment. And even, I reread it in anticipation of this conversation because I hadn't read it in, honestly, 35 years or something. And it's so modern with just very direct information. The mom in the book says, bring your boyfriends here. You can be in the den. I don't want you parking on the street. My mom would not have said that So here was a mom who said that felt so, it's just after the sexual revolution, this book. I think it's 1975 or 1978. And you can feel that in the just very natural, very accepting, very matter of fact, kind of approach to sex. What was so beautiful about the Jewishness of these books is that it was almost incidental. So they're not books about Judaism, but the characters are Jewish. Where else would I have found that? I mean, I'm getting chills just saying it. I saw myself reflected in these books. And, on page 4 of Forever, and I only know this because I just read it, there's a reference to the main character's friend and how her grandparents came over from Europe and were given a name by the customs official. And I just sort of thought, oh yeah, I get that because our name was changed. And so just seeing Jewishness reflected in these pages in that same way, actually, that she deals with sex as just this sort of matter of fact, this is normal, this is acceptable. These are some people's families. That was my family.
Yeah, it's interesting. Somebody asked me recently, they said there are so many Jewish writers, even though the Jews are a minority, like you must not have experienced representation as an issue. You must have felt so represented. That was not my experience. I'm curious if that was yours as well.
That was not my experience. My experience. Because I think if that had been my experience, these books wouldn't have left me with this feeling of inclusion that still lasts till today.
On Death, Sex, and Money, we feature interviews with you, our community of listeners, getting honest about uncomfortable things.
I developed an illness where it isn't safe for me to drive. A friend once said to me, sex is like air. You don't think about it until you're not getting enough. This is a similar sort of thing if you just replace sex with driving.
Listen to Death, Sex, and Money wherever you get podcasts.
Book 2, A Jewish Book from Adulthood. Portnoy's Complaint by Philip Roth.
I can't not laugh because it's such a funny choice. And when I started to write How to Share an Egg, I was not drawn to any book that I felt was too similar to what I was writing. For me, that really shuts me down creatively. You start to get nervous. Am I as good as this? And I know it's not good for me. So this was a Jewish book, a very Jewish book, that I could read that was totally different from my book, totally different voice, obviously male perspective, different time, that still centered me in the Jewish experience. And I think what I enjoyed so much about this book, which is still quite outrageous today, is how over the top it is and how overtly Jewish it is. And even moving into areas that might make us cringe or feel sort of reflexively protective. There's a lot of Yiddish in it. It's a crazy book, and it made me feel very free. And How to Share an Egg is not a crazy book. It's fairly conventional, but still this book, Portnoy's Complaint, removed barriers for me and let me feel immersed in a people and a culture and free to use the language that I wanted to use. Like there was this period where I wasn't sure how much Yiddish to use. Not that there's very much, but there's a little. And I wasn't sure how much to explain. There's this thing, do you write for the inside or the outside? So I really was struggling with some of those questions. And this book really helped me just say, this is my culture. This is the language. Just sort of go for it. Just sort of really be inside my own skin, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting. Because when you emailed me, you said that this helped you with some of the very Jewish stuff that you have a complicated relationship with. So maybe you could just tease out a little more of what the complicated part was, thinking about it.
I think I grew up a little bit protective of my Jewish identity. So I certainly didn't hide it, but I think that I just had a natural sense of not wanting to be too exposed. And again, that's partly coming from a place that had only, whatever it had, 5,000 Jews or something. And knowing that you were other, right? And definitely, I always had a sense of being other. Absolutely. And then, of course, being the child of a survivor, I think those two things made me just a little bit reticent, a little bit careful. And so this, Portnoy's complaint just made me feel that there was a lot of space. There's a lot of space for me to find my place in the continuum of Jewish voices and to not be afraid to expose myself and to be myself on the page.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. And also, the most neuroses you could get, the most, stereotypically, all of the bad stereotypes that come with Judaism are there. So that makes a lot of sense.
You could hate this book, right? A Jewish person could hate this book, could say, this is, like you just said, feeds into the worst stereotypes about how we are and what we do. And it makes me so mad. Maybe somebody could say that. But to me, there's a wildness to it. There's a playfulness to it. There's a satirical, it's so obviously over the top with the purpose of getting to bigger truths that, yes, it helped me claim my own Jewish voice.
Book 3, A Book That Changed Your Worldview, The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion.
This is Joan Didion's exploration of her shattered mind after her husband died suddenly.
And what made you choose it?
Oh, this book is unbelievable. I had it on my shelf for a long time, and I was never drawn to reading it. And then after my mother died, I picked it up, and it's just incredible. It's not sad. It's a book about death, and it's a book about grief, and it's a book about mourning, and it's a book about shock. But what I admire is the hardworking writer that is exploring her own psyche over and over again from this angle, from that angle. I can still remember specific sentences, and she's just working so hard to understand what is happening to her. And so it's fascinating. It's almost scientific. I mean, it's the kind of book that I'd like to read every year. It speaks to a key aspect of the human experience, coping with death and loss. And then from a craft point of view, as a writer, I just read it and how did she do that? Let me see that again. How did she do that? The way she uses repetition, the way she brings in different sources outside, like a journalist, right? Which is my background before I wrote How to Share an Egg. It's just a masterpiece. I love it. Everyone should read it.
Yeah, it made sense to me that you would choose it. It's also so much about feeling trapped by memories. And, I got that sense from reading your book. You were trapped by your father's memories in addition to your own. And just that question of how do you live alongside grief was so much, of what you were also exploring in your own book.
I didn't think of that, but that's really a really interesting thought. I mean, I think something about it that just speaks to me so much is that she's writing her way through what she's experiencing. She's actually using the writing to figure out what the hell is going on, what is happening to her, and you can feel that. It's so, it's a book about death, but it's so alive. It's really an incredible piece of work.
Did you feel that when you were writing your book also, of sort of writing your way through?
Yes. Yeah. I feel so much better having written How to Share an Egg. And so I really did. I mean, Joan herself said that sometimes she wrote to find out what she thought. And I found out so much about what I thought and how I felt through writing the book. I think most writers feel that we can't get exactly what we feel. It's amorphous. It's like trying to pin smoke, but you get close, and it's a relief to have captured that.
Book 4, the book you're reading now, Still Life with Remorse by Myra Kalman.
I picked it up, a signed copy. I was in New York for the Jewish Book Festival, actually, and I picked it up while I was there. And I have such a long relationship with Myra Kalman, although she doesn't know it. Only I know it. It's a one-sided relationship. But she has been important to me for many years. So I've kind of followed her career. And if you know her work and you've been following her work, you can see how this would be a very mature work for her, because it's more personal and more exposed than I have seen her be before. And of course, her art is incredible, but even the text, she's such a gifted human being.
Book 5, the author's latest book, How to Share an Egg, A True Story of Hunger, Love, and Plenty by Bonny Reichert. I am excited to dive into How to Share an Egg. I'm curious to go back to this push-pull, and you write a lot about how you avoided Holocaust-themed books and movies as a child. So I'm curious to hear, if having written the book, if you still feel that sort of phobia or push from it, or if you feel like you have arrived at a different place.
There's a real darkness that lives inside me. And I think what it's probably called is intergenerational trauma. We never talked about trauma when I was a child, and that was part of my father's absolute determination to be well and for us to be well. But I was very avoidant of anything Holocaust related. I was in Jewish youth group, and once in a while they'd show a Holocaust movie or some footage, and I'd go running out of the room, already crying, already feeling like I was going to throw up. So the things that I saw, I knew from my dad, but my dad had put such a mystical spin on things, on his stories, that they had seemed almost like fairy tales. And I think I am quite a bit stronger after having written the book as well. I had to do things for the book that I didn't think I could do. Like, I cannot watch my father's video testimony. I still can't, but I read the transcript. And of course, we did many, many interviews together, but he's receptive. So, I would say, tell me about the time that my dad stole potatoes and somebody else was punished. So I could hear that. But then when he started to detail what the punishment was, I said, okay, stop. Because it's like, I can feel it right now. It's like a physical sickness that I feel sometimes.
Yeah. In a different vein, I wanted to talk to you about chillent. A chillent is, for those who don't know, is a sort of a stew that's prepared on Friday. It was then cooked overnight in a communal oven. Now, in the Orthodox communities, it's cooked in a crock pot, so that you can eat it on Saturday without cooking on Shabbat. And you talked about trying to recreate the cholent of your father's youth. I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about that. I loved that section.
Thank you. Yes. It's funny with the cholent because we really could have eaten it as kids, and my parents never made it. My mom was a good cook, not a flamboyant cook, but she hated stew. So this is a funny contradiction. My dad's most revered dish was a type of stew. He also could have made it. He knew how to cook, but he never made it. So it became more and more mythical, this dish that my dad ate as a child and that his mother brought home from the communal bakery and that they only ate on Shabbat. I think even just having meat was probably a luxury. I decided to try to recreate it for him while I was in the midst of writing this book.
Have you found the one that, your father sort of recognizes as the cholent of his youth?
Yes, I think that his standards have probably changed. A lifetime in the restaurant business, he went on to develop more cosmopolitan tastes than he would have had as a little boy in a shtetl in Poland. So making exactly what he remembered is not the same as making what he is going to love. So there is a version that he loves. And then there's the true version that my grandmother probably cooked, something closer. Her name was Udall. And then there's my French post-chef school version as well.
Yeah. I'm curious if for you, looking back on all of the foods that you talk about in all of the chapters, if you have one that you sort of gravitate towards as, I don't know, a favorite or something that really stands out for you.
The foods from the early chapters have a lot of meaning for me. There's a chapter called Molasses, and that is about my Baba Sarah's molasses porridge bread and my memories of making this beautiful brown bread with her, sitting on the counter, learning how to knead beside her that way, and the feel of the warm dough under my hands and her hands over mine. So these are really sensory memories, and some of those foods still mean so much to me.
I loved reading about your grandmother. And I think you describe, waking up to the smell of lungs in the morning, which not many of us do these days.
Yeah.
Those were great sections.
That was when she came to visit. I don't know. Did she get up at 3 o'clock in the morning? Did she get up at 2 o'clock in the morning? She just didn't sleep. She really did not sleep. And we'd come down in the morning and maybe she'd have made pecan cinnamon rolls, or maybe she'd have made knishes, or maybe she'd have made, in the summer, she made blueberry veranicas, which were phenomenal, boiled blueberry stuffed dumplings with like a purple juice inside, just incredible. But sometimes she made tongue, or yes, lung. She made lung, and the kitchen smelled like a slaughterhouse. And my sisters, I'm the youngest of 4 sisters, would, they were teenagers. I was a little kid. They would gag and, oh, gross, and cover their mouths. And I have to admit that I was kind of fascinated by that smell. Just like when my mom used to take me into the fish store, and I knew it didn't smell good, but I was really curious and interested in that smell. So I guess always destined to go to culinary school.
I was going to say that you were the one to do that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole book is about how you approach food as something with joy, because your father, he was able to see food as something to savor. He was in the restaurant business. You went to culinary school. You write about food. I'm wondering what it is that you think it is about him that he was able to metabolize all that he experienced to find so much joy in living.
Thank you for picking up on the book being about joy, because that really is such an important part of what I wanted to express. And, I think we all have certain images in our mind of what a Holocaust survivor is like and what a Holocaust survivor family is like. And some of those things might be true, but there's so much more. There is so much joy and beauty and pleasure. And I was brought up with so much of that. He is a very special person. He really is. And I think it's a few things. I think he probably was born an optimist. He really likes beauty and he really looks for beauty. I think that's part of probably how he came into the world. Then I think that part of his coping mechanism has been to look back on his early childhood as very beautiful. And he feeds off of that. He's a romantic, and he talks about his wonderful mother and the delicious things they ate, and the Gera rabbi, the head rabbi in his village, and just this, he's almost constructed a fairy tale for himself. It's just an incredible coping mechanism that he has developed to, as you said, metabolize, to find the right space. He knows that something terrible happened to him, and he can face it, and he talks about it, and he doesn't varnish it. He absolutely will tell you with whatever amount of detail you can stomach the things that happened to him and the suffering. But he just leans toward joy. And I even wonder if when we were little kids, if his recasting of these experiences as almost like fairy tales, almost like thrilling children's stories, helped him recast his memories. And he wasn't fooling himself, but maybe there was some healing in that for him.
Mm-hmm. I was so struck by your description of wanting to absorb your father's pain. You say that when you were a young girl, you had an idea, and I'm quoting you, "The more I soaked up his suffering, the less hurt he would be." And then on the next page, you write about your own kind of bedtime fears and tears. And you write, again, I'm quoting you, that you wanted to dry up with love and positive messages. Be happy. That's all you have to do, he told me. Mm-hmm. I thought it was such a beautiful encapsulation of love, or what we get wrong about love. This idea that misguided idea that you can help someone feel differently in their own skin or with their own life. You were each kind of trying to do that for the other. And I wonder if that experience, how you've absorbed that, and if you have any thoughts about how that's impacted your own parenting.
What an interesting question. First, I would say he still talks to me like that. He will still say to me, "What are you doing for fun? What beautiful food will you buy today? What are you cooking for dinner?" You could hear it as pressure, and sometimes it has felt like pressure, but it's also he's just relentlessly in search of joy and pleasure. And what an incredible person to have had access to my whole life. That said, you can't will somebody else to be happy, and you can't decide for them how they're going to feel. So I have tried to, as a mom, take the beautiful things that I've learned from him and bring them to my children, but understand that I don't get to say how happy they're going to be, or where they're going to find their pleasure, or even how they're going to deal with this legacy that I am passing along to them through my father.
Again, that joy, and that joy really comes through in how you write about food, how you write about your life. You make it very much your own story as well as your father's story. I thought you did just such a masterful job drawing all those threads together and making it a story that I think is accessible for so many different people who are interested in so many different things to really understand what it means, I think, to live alongside trauma. I think it's just such a beautiful book. I hope everyone will read it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, I loved it. It was great. I loved every minute of it.
Our guest today was Bonny Reichert, discussing her memoir, How to Share an Egg, a true story of hunger, love, and plenty. You can find a link to the book and all the others Bonny discussed in our show notes. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to subscribe and share with friends and family. You can also find us on Instagram at 5bookspod. I'm Tali Rosenblatt-Cohen. Our producer is Odelia Rubin. Music by Dove Rosenblatt and Blue Dot Sessions. Art by Dina Friedman. Thanks especially to the Jewish Book Council.